So I would like to please welcome to the stage the founder of Leadership Inc., Ty Bennett.
Good afternoon. You know, one of the icons in the food service industry is Howard Schultz. And I know we all recognize Howard Schultz as the chairman and CEO of Starbucks today, but how many of you know the real story of where Howard came from? A couple of you. Let me tell you where Howard came from, because Howard was born in the housing projects of Brooklyn, New York. And you know, he was born in that situation, but unlike so many people who were born into that situation, Howard found his way out of the projects. And for him, his ticket was a full-ride football scholarship to the University of Northern Michigan. And that scholarship allowed him to play football, but more importantly, it allowed him to get a college education. Howard became the very first member of his family to graduate from college. Well, after college, he held several different sales positions until he was hired by a company called Hammerplast, a Swedish housewares company. And at Hammerplast, his number one client was this single-store coffee house out of Seattle called Starbucks. They kept buying these Swedish strip coffee makers from Howard. And so he decided he was going to go and check them out, see this client, go and visit him. So he got on a plane, he flew to Seattle. It was the first time he had ever been west of the Mississippi. He was excited about it. He stepped off the plane and he loved everything about the city of Seattle. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but he fell in love from the first minute he got there. When he walked into Starbucks, he loved the aroma. He loved the ambiance that they had created. He sat down with the owners and he was amazed at the care they took in choosing and roasting the beans. And as Howard left that day, he said, "I'm going to be part of that company." Well, it took Howard an entire year to convince the owners of Starbucks to hire him. And they finally did, and he came on as the sales director. And as he was there working for Starbucks, they sent him over to Italy to do some work. And as he was walking around in Italy, he had this epiphany. He was looking around and he was thinking, this has got to be wrong. There are literally coffee houses on every corner. And he thought, they can't drink this much coffee. There's no way somebody can drink this much coffee. And then it hit him. He started to realize that these coffee houses were they were part of the societal glue of Italy, if you will. They were a place not just to get a good cup of coffee, but they were a place to do business, to meet friends, to have a relaxing afternoon. They were kind of a home away from home, if you will. And he came back to Seattle with this idea, and he said, I've got it. We can take this and we can expand. We can grow this all around the world. Well, the owners of Starbucks said, thank you, but no thank you. We're happy with the one store that we have. We're doing well. We're profitable. That's not our business plan. And so Howard had a choice. He decided to leave, and he went and he started his own coffee house called Giornali. And it was so successful that he came back a year later and he bought Starbucks for $3.8 million. And the rest, as they say, is history, right? Today, Howard is the chairman and CEO of Starbucks. Starbucks is in 50 countries around the world with nearly 15,000 locations. And you know, the interesting thing about Starbucks to me is that Starbucks is one of those few companies that really personifies an industry. I mean, think about it. When you think about getting a cup of coffee, we often say, I'm going to go and get a Starbucks, right? I don't even drink coffee, and I think of Starbucks when I think about coffee. And I don't think it's just because they make the best cup of coffee. I think there's more to it. You see, Starbucks is constantly praised for their friendly customer service. They're constantly given awards and recognized for the environment that they've created. And I think it has a lot to do with what Howard is constantly reminding his people. He has this catchphrase, and it's a simple phrase that has a lot of power in it. He's always saying, we're not in the coffee business serving people. We're in the people business serving coffee. Now, I want you to think about that as we begin today. Because Howard Schultz is a great leader because he recognizes that fundamental truth and he has his priorities straight. The truth is, everyone in this room, all of us in here, we're all in the people business, aren't we? First and foremost, we interact with people on a daily basis. It doesn't matter what role you're in, whether you're in management or you're overseeing operations, whatever it may be, we're all in the people business. We all interact with people at work, at home, and at play. We're in the people business. Now, I get a chance with what I do to speak to organizations, to corporations, and audiences like this all around the world on the topic of leadership. And how many of you view yourselves as a leader? By show of hands, how many of you really look at yourself and say, you know what, yeah, I am. I hope that every hand goes up. You know, this conference is about leadership. It's about bringing together the leaders of this industry to come together, to network, to learn from each other, and grow together. And the truth is, leadership today is our scarcest resource, and yet it's our most needed commodity. And the great thing about leadership is that nobody has to appoint you to be a leader. It's completely up to the way that you live your life. I love what John Quincy Adams said. He said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, or become more, then you are a leader. And leaders are definitely in the people business because leadership begins and ends with people. And you know, the truth is that people won't go along with you unless they get along with you, right? Years ago, there was a great quote by Dale Carnegie. He said, dealing with people is probably the most difficult problem you face, especially if you're in business. And then he said, yes, that's also true if you're a housewife, architect, or engineer. You know, the truth is we all have to deal with people. Sometimes our interactions are good, sometimes they're bad, but we end up doing it every single day. And I don't know about you, but there's sometimes that, maybe you can relate to this. Sometimes I feel like life would be a lot easier if you just didn't have to deal with other people. Do you ever feel like that? Okay, so with what I do, I fly quite a bit. And I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Delta has a hub in Salt Lake City, Utah, so I fly Delta exclusively. Because I fly with them so often, I get upgraded to first class virtually every time I fly. It's kind of a nice perk. So not too long ago, I had a speech up in the Bay Area. I was flying from Salt Lake City to Oakland. It's a quick hour-and-a-half painless flight. I was upgraded to first class. I was seated in seat 4B, and I think I was the first one on the airplane. I sat down, and I pulled out my iPad. I was doing email as people were coming on the plane, so I wasn't paying attention. And I was looking down, and all of a sudden this gentleman stopped next to me, and he said, "Get up, you're in my seat." And he said it just like that. He said, "Get up, you're in my seat." And I looked up and I went, "Wow, I'm sorry, what seat are you in?" And he said, "This is first class. Do you realize this is first class? You're in my seat." Don't you love people like that? And I said, "Yes, I realize this is first class. I'm also seated in first class. What seat are you in?" And then he asked me what I still believe is the dumbest question I've ever heard in my entire life. He said, "Did you pay to sit in first class, or did you just get upgraded? Because I paid for my first class seat." And so I answered him. I said, "I got upgraded," which really stinks for you, because that means I paid a lot less money for the exact same seat. I said, "What seat are you in?" He said, "I'm in 4C. And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. 4C is right there across the aisle. This is 4B, my seat. And without any hesitation, any apology or anything, he just turns and sits down in his seat. Now, I don't know what you would do. I don't usually get worked up with people, but by this point I was ticked. And so I looked across the aisle and I said, "You know what? You would suck at what I do." And he said, "What?" I said, I did not stutter. I said, "You would suck at what I do." And he said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because you're not good with people. You're horrible with people. Just be nice. It's not that hard." And you know, he looked at me like no one had ever told him he was a jerk before. I shared that with an audience last week, and the lady in the front row goes, "No, his ex-wife told him he was a jerk." Have you guys ever met the guy in 4C before? We all have, haven't we? We all run into that guy everywhere we go, it seems like. And you know, it's interesting, in the people business, we all want our communication to be clear. We want our interactions to be perfect. We want our connection to be deep, but it just doesn't always happen that way. I want to show you a quick video clip, because I think you'll be able to relate to this interaction. Take a look at this.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Do you ever feel like that? Like you're the German Coast Guard trying to communicate with your employees or your people, something, and you're like, what? Something's being lost in translation here, right? You know, for me, that's why I've always been fascinated with leadership, because my experience has shown me that no one is more intimately involved in the people business than leaders. So it was mentioned a little bit in my introduction. When I was 21 years old, my brother Scott and I started a business together. And Scott was a lot older. He was a lot wiser. He had a lot more experience than I did. He was 22 at the time. And, you know, the truth is we were just young entrepreneurs, and we were willing to jump in with both feet, and we worked hard. And we built that business to over $25 million in revenue while still in our 20s. And that opened the door for me to do what I really love to do, and that's this: to speak to companies and organizations and audiences all around the world on the topic of leadership. And I love what I do. I love the opportunity that I get to share my thoughts and my stories and my ideas with you, and to share something that might cause a spark in your mind, that might cause you to make a change in your life. I was talking to my wife about that this morning, and I said, would you have ever imagined in your wildest dreams that I'd be able to do this? I mean, be able to speak to audiences like this. And my wife is pretty funny. She got a little smile on her face, and she said, Ty, in my wildest dreams, you don't even show up. You know, the truth is my wife's amazing. We've been married for coming up on 9 years. We have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. A couple of years ago, I was sitting on an airplane. I was sitting next to this woman. She was about 80 years old, and we were just talking, getting to know each other, and she said, do you have a family? I said, I do. I said, I've been married for 7 years. We just had our 3rd child, and she just gave me this shocked look, and I said, yeah, we don't mess around, and she said, no, but I think you do. You know, I joke about it, but I really do think it's an important principle that you love what you do, because I've just found in every industry that people who enjoy what they do, they naturally excel at it. And so I get a chance to do what I love, and there's nothing greater in the world than being able to do what you love. And I love talking about leadership, and as we do that, there's pen and paper on your table right now. I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to take a second. I want you to think about and write down your definition of leadership. As it pertains to you and what you do, how can you clearly, concisely define what leadership means to you? It's one of those nebulous terms, isn't it? It's one of those things that sometimes it's hard to get your head around and say, okay, what does it really mean to be a leader? As you're doing that, as you're writing down your ideas, let me share a couple of thoughts with you. Rosalind Carter, the wife of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, once said that leadership is taking someone from where they are to where they want to be. But she continued, she said, but a great leader takes someone not necessarily from where they want to be, but where they ought to be. I think that's a really good definition of leadership. Let me give you another one to think about. Stephen Covey, his definition of leadership is to communicate to people their worth and potential so clearly that they come to see it in themselves. I think that's another good definition of leadership. Now, as you think about yours, let me tell you mine. My definition of leadership is really simple. It's one word. It's influence. I believe that wraps up leadership, because as a leader in the people business, the influence that you have with other people is ultimately the leadership that you hold. It's whether or not you can move people, you can impact people, you can persuade people, you can motivate people. That's the leadership that matters as we are in the people business on a daily basis. So when I talk about influence, what am I talking about? There's really 3 types of influence. The first is situational influence, and situational influence means that people follow because they have to. Now, situational influence is something that we're all familiar with. It's typically associated with a position of authority, right? Your boss has authority over you. Maybe it's the manager, the CEO, whoever it is. Someone's been given authority, and so people are forced or compelled to follow. Maybe it's a school teacher or a traffic cop. But in that given situation, it's situational because outside of that realm, they probably don't have very much influence. Now, the second type of influence is temporary influence. And temporary influence means that people follow because of what you've done in the past. Maybe you've done some amazing things, and people know you by reputation. They respect you, and they will buy into you a little bit because of who you are and what you've done. Here's the problem with that. Unless you continue to show up every single day and perform at that level, you will not continue to have influence with those people. Is that not true? Think about it. This is halfway through the year. Same applies to me. I'm a speaker. I've given this particular speech probably 35 times this year. And you know, those 35 speeches before this one, take my word for it, I was incredible. I was just amazing. You know, the truth is you don't care, do you? You just hope that I'm pretty good today. That's all that really matters, and the same is true for you. You have to show up every single day to continue to carry influence with the people that you lead. What we're really after, the type of influence that really moves people, is lasting influence. You see, lasting influence means that people follow you based on who you are and how you treat them. And you know, it's interesting because situational influence and temporary influence can become lasting influence, but only if the essential ingredient of integrity is added. Now, I think integrity is vitally important. And for me, when I think about integrity, the one person who comes to mind automatically is Gandhi. Gandhi was such an amazing example of a leader because think about it. Gandhi never held a position of authority. He was never in formal office. Whether it was religiously or politically, no one ever was told they have to follow Gandhi, and yet an entire nation and most of the world has chosen to follow Gandhi and his teachings because of who he was and how he treated people. You know, when I do this in a smaller setting, in a workshop, I'll have the group put together a list of the essential qualities and characteristics of a leader, and I've never done that activity where they didn't add integrity to the list. So why is it so important? What is it? Well, integrity comes from the root of the word integer, which means whole or complete. So when you live a life of integrity, you live a life of honesty and honor. You're the kind of person that people choose to follow. It's important as we recognize the leadership that we have, the influence that we carry, that we need to be able to influence people based off of who we are, not the position we hold. One of my favorite stories from Gandhi's life was when he went to speak to the House of Commons in England. Now remember, Gandhi was leading the revolution of India to free themselves from England. So when he went over to England, he was not a very liked person. And he showed up at the House of Commons to a hostile crowd, 300 people, arms crossed, not very excited to hear what he had to say. And Gandhi stood up in front of this crowd for 3 hours. And without any notes, he completely changed that hostile crowd into a standing ovation. And right afterwards, reporters were amazed at what he had done, and so they went up to his secretary, a man named Mahadev Desai, and they said, how in the world could Gandhi do this? How could he stand up there for so long, for 3 hours without any notes, and share the way that he shared and speak so eloquently? And Desai's response was really interesting as it pertains to integrity. Desai said, what Gandhi thinks, what he feels, what he says, and what he does are all the same thing. He doesn't need notes. He said, the problem is you and I, we think one thing, we feel a second, we say a third, and we do a fourth, so we need notes and files to keep track. It's a gut check, isn't it? As a leader, you have a responsibility to live a life that people would choose to follow. Live a life of integrity to where people want to follow you based on who you are. Now, as I think about the definition that I love of influence, it comes from a great book called The Go-Giver. In The Go-Giver, John David Mann and Bob Berg define influence like this. They say, your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Now, I want to say that again. I want you to really think about this. Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Now, at first glance, that seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, you think about an influential leader and you think about being powerful and persuasive. But you know, the truth is, leadership was never about you. It's about the people that you lead. And you go, okay, I get that, that's fine, but in the real world and business, isn't that naive to think that we can place other people's interests first and that's going to create influence? But here's what I would promise you, that when you begin to live your life this way, not only will your personal relationships flourish, but professionally you will see impact that you have never seen before. So how do you do that? Well, let me share with you 5 applications of influence. 5 practical and profitable ways that you can place other people's interests first. 5 ways that you can increase your influence and your impact as a leader, and do so in a way that not only builds you, but it builds them. They are to develop outward thinking, to invest in people, to focus on being interested, not interesting, to practice the platinum rule, and to seek to serve. So let's dive into these. The first is to develop outward thinking, and I start with your thought process for a reason. You see, all of our actions follow our thoughts, don't they? We first think something and then we act accordingly. Well, the interesting thing is, as human beings, we are naturally selfish thinkers. I don't say that in a mean way, it's just our natural inclination is to care about our own needs, wants, and desires. And yet, when it comes to human interaction, to winning with people, to being a great leader, that doesn't work. We need to shift our thinking from being inner-directed to outer-directed. When you can make that shift, it drives action that is both uncommon and powerful. Now, I want to illustrate what I mean. There was a contest several years ago in which poems were submitted from around the world, and I want to show you this poem that won this contest. The reason it caught my eye is because the criteria for the contest was that the poem had to be life-altering. And I thought, that's pretty cool. What kind of poem is life-altering? I'm going to show you the poem that won. It's a great message, but I want you to pay really close attention to the shift in mindset that takes place. Take a look at this.
I am part of a lost generation, and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick-fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own making. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. Experts tell me this is a quick-fix society, but this will not be true in my era. Families stayed together once upon a time. I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.
Is that awesome? You can clap for that. I mean, what a message, just an amazing message. But did you see the shift that took place in that thought process? That's the kind of shift that I'm talking about, where you and I as leaders, we go from being inner-directed to outer-directed. We change from being self-centered to others-focused, from tight-fisted to generous, from nearsighted to farsighted. We go from being selfish to selfless. And here's the truth. That shift has to take place, because leadership was never about you anyway. Think about it. If you don't have people that are following you, you are not a leader. If no one is being influenced by you, you are not an influencer. And so it has to be about them because you don't exist without them anyway. And yet we screw it up so often because we think it's all about us. I'll be the first to admit that that's not an easy lesson to learn. In fact, for me, it was a really hard lesson to learn. When I was 17 years old, I had been dating this girl for a couple of months. I think it was a record for me at the time. I was pretty excited about it. And we were sitting at my house one day, and she looked over and she said, "Ty, you know what your problem is?" That's never a great way to start a conversation. And I kind of bit my tongue and I said, "No, what's my problem?" And she said, "You're never genuinely happy for people." And this was out of left field. I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I kind of fought back, and then she gave me an example that I couldn't refute. She said, "Okay, you play basketball, right?" She said, "Let's just say we run into somebody today, and you ask them what they do, and they say, 'I play basketball.' Your automatic response would be, 'Oh, I play basketball too. I'm the starting point guard on the basketball team, and our team's doing great,' and blah, 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 blah." And you'd make it all about you. And her example hit me square between the eyes. Now, we didn't last very long after that experience. But I will be forever grateful for the lesson that she taught me. She ended by saying, "Ty, your selfish thinking is totally unattractive. Something you never want to hear from your girlfriend, right? But it was true. And I had to change my thought process because people could perceive that, and it came across in the way that I interacted with people. So I want to ask you a couple questions. I want you to take a self-assessment here. Just put everything down that you have in your hands. I want you to just think about this. You don't have to share it with anybody else, but I want you to analyze your thought process. You know, many of you are in sales. In a sales position, as you're going through the sales cycle, do you care more about the customer that you're serving or about the commission you're going to receive? Now, that sounds like an obvious answer, but think about it. What's going on in your mind? Are you thinking, hey, man, if I make this sale, think about what I'm going to get, right? Because those little things are perceived by other people. That thought process comes across. Now, as leaders, everyone in this room, is your natural inclination to take responsibility or to place blame? Think about it. How do you act? What is your thought process? Because as we change our mindset to what we're thinking, we put ourselves in the right mindset for the other 4 applications of influence. Now, there's other questions that you'll get in my book that you can dive into and analyze that, but that mindset is so important as it pertains to influence. Now, the second application is to invest in people. When I was in high school, I played basketball. In the fall of my junior year, I decided to run cross country to get in better shape for basketball. Things were going great. I was enjoying the practices. I was getting good workouts in. I was enjoying the kids on the team. We were making friends, and the first meet came around. Now, in cross country, you run a 5K. It's a little over 3 miles, and you don't run on a track. You run off-road. So you're going, on dirt roads, over streams, up hills, all over the place. And the first meet, I'm running about a mile into it. And I go up this really steep hill, and you make a sharp turn right at the top of it. So I get up the hill, and as I stepped to turn, I stepped in a hole, and my knee twisted, and it popped. Long story short, cross country was done, but basketball was out for the season. I was devastated. At 17, I lived for basketball. I was going to be the first 5'3" white guy in the NBA. I was set. I knew what I was going to do, and I had all this extra time on my hands. I didn't know what I was going to do, and a friend convinced me to get involved in a program called DECA. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with DECA or not. DECA is a great program. DECA is a program that trains future leaders in high school and college in the areas of business, entrepreneurship, and marketing. And as part of the program, kids from around the country compete in different business competitions, first at the district level, then at state, and eventually at nationals. Well, I chose to compete in the entrepreneurship category, which meant that I had to conceive of a business. I wrote a 65-page business plan, and then I would present it to judges who were acting as venture capitalists, trying to convince them to invest in my business. That's what the competition was based on. So I went to the district competition, and I ended up winning the district competition. So I qualified for the state competition. In the state of Colorado, that was held at the Broadmoor Resort. It was a cool experience. A couple rounds through that, I ended up winning the state competition, which qualified me for the national competition, which that year was held in Louisville, Kentucky. Is anybody from Kentucky in here? One person from Kentucky. Okay, I don't want you to take offense to this next part, okay? I went to Kentucky. Have you been to Louisville before? Anybody been to Louisville? Cool city, lots of people, right? Cool city. I went, we had a Louisville Slugger baseball bat made. I thought it was great. I honestly thought, you know what, I probably will never go back. But as fate would have it, I was married in Louisville, Kentucky. My wife is from southern Indiana, just up the road, and we ended up getting married in Louisville. And don't take offense to this next part. Something interesting really happened that I have to share with you. When we decided to get married in Kentucky, we drove down a week before to fill out the marriage license application. And I kid you not, I wish I had a copy of this. On the marriage license application in the state of Kentucky, there's a question that says, relation to spouse, cousin, none other. No, you can't make that stuff up. That's true. I mean, think about it. If you put other, how many options do you really have? That's like primary family pretty much is the only thing you have left. Okay, so that really had nothing to do with the DECA story. It was just kind of an interesting side note at Louisville. So overall, there were probably 10,000 kids who competed in the entrepreneurship category, but nationals was down to the top 100, or the top 2 from every state. So we have the first round, and we present to the judges, and then they cut the top 100 down to the top 50, and I made it through to the second round. The next round, we present to the judges again, and they cut it down to the top 15. Big room like this, big stage like this, they call 15 names, and you're coming up on stage to say that you're in the final round. I was sweating bullets. I was the 15th name called. I don't know if I just squeaked in or what, but I made it to the final round. So overall, I had probably given this presentation thousands of times. I mean, I had given it in the mirror over and over and over again. I'd given it to my parents, to my siblings, to my friends, to my teachers, all of them until they said, just stop giving that presentation. We don't want to hear it anymore. I gave it at districts, at state, in the first couple round at nationals, but I had never given that presentation better than that final round at nationals. I mean, it was perfect. I was just, everything flowed perfectly. My joke, they were laughing at my jokes even though they weren't funny. They asked great questions. I responded with great answers. Everything went fantastic, and I left there thinking, I just won. I mean, out of 10,000 kids, I just won. Well, I didn't. I took second, and I'm sure the girl in first place cheated, and I still can't prove it, still to today. But you know, what I remember more than standing on that stage was what happened right after that final presentation. The head judge, who was a prominent businessman in Louisville, Kentucky, he walked around the stage afterwards as I was gathering my things, and he had his business card in his hand. And he said, Ty, that was really impressive. I want you to call me. I'd love to invest in you. And you know, I was 17, and I kind of laughed, and I said, I don't want this to affect my score, but I'm not actually planning on starting this business. I hope that doesn't change anything. And then he said something that has always stuck with me. He said, you know, that's okay. He said, I've always found that I get my highest return on investment when I invest in people, and I want to invest in you. Now, it took me a long time to figure out that he meant nothing financially. You see, when you invest in people, what he was talking about was investing his time, was investing his wisdom, was investing his care, his understanding, was actually investing himself. And you know, I believe that for a leader to be influential, they need to make it a daily practice to invest in their people, to give a little bit more, to do what other leaders won't do, to care a little bit more, because those investments make the world a difference. Let me give you a real-world example of a great leader where I saw this happen. In 2003, on the Good Morning America show, Charlie Gibson was interviewing General Earl Hailston, who at the time was the acting general of the United States Marine Corps. And they were stationed outside of Iraq. They were waiting for orders to go to war. And so the interview was pretty normal. He said, you know, what's the morale of the troops? What do you know about the situation in Baghdad? What's going on? And they were just kind of in a holding pattern. And I don't know if Charlie was just curious or bored or what, but right at the end of the interview, he asked this random question. He said, General, do you have any hobbies? I mean, it seemed kind of out of the blue. He said, you're just sitting there. What do you do with your time? And the general replied, he said, yeah, actually, I love photography. He said, it's interesting that you bring that up, because every day while we've been here, I've gone out and I take pictures of my men. And I come back to my tent at night and I email those pictures along with a little note back home to their mothers. And Charlie was intrigued, and he said, would you mind sharing what you say? And the general said, sure, no problem. He pulled open his laptop and he pulled up the last email he had sent, and this is what it said. It said, Dear Mrs. Johnson, I thought you would enjoy seeing this picture of your son. He's doing great. I can tell you that you've done a wonderful job of raising him. I'm certainly proud to serve with him in the United States Marine Corps. Signed, General Earl Hailston. Now, you know, I personally have never read the job description of a Marine Corps general, but I would venture to guess that nowhere in that job description does it say you need to take pictures and send home emails to worried mothers while you're at war. I think that General Hailston was the kind of leader who invested in his people, the kind of leader who gave just a little bit more than most people were, and because of that, he carried influence that most people would never carry because of who he was and how he treated people. So this is my challenge to you today. I want you today to consciously go out and invest in someone. When I say invest, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a simple thing. Hold open a door. Call somebody just to say, hey, I was thinking about you, or you know what, I just wanted to call and say I love you. Get them their favorite candy bar. Just do something simple, but those simple little investments, they're like deposits in emotional bank accounts that will pay dividends for years to come. Make sure you invest in your people. Now, the third application of influence is to focus on being interested, not interesting. It's interesting where this came from. I had a friend who called me a couple of years ago, and she said, Ty, can we talk? And I said, sure. We set up a time, and she came over to my house. And as she sat down, she said, Ty, I'm just not happy. I said, what do you mean? And she started telling me about how she was a freshman in college. She wasn't dating much. She wasn't making friends. She was struggling. She just wasn't very happy. And as she kept talking, she kept saying this phrase over and over again. She said, I just wish I was more interesting. I wish people wanted to get to know me better. I'm sure we've all felt that before, haven't we? And at the end of it, I asked if I could give her a piece of advice. And my advice was simply this. I said, I want you to focus on being interested, not interesting. You see, being interesting is all about you, but being interested is all about them. It's placing other people's interests first. And I made a promise to her. I said, I promise you that in the next 2 months, you will make more friends by being interested than you will in the next 2 years by trying to be interesting to other people. And you know, in a business setting, I could make you the same promise. You will carry more influence in the next 2 months by being interested than you would in the next 2 years by trying to just make yourself interesting to others. That's the truth. And if we figure that out and we learn how to really focus on being interested with people, we all of a sudden validate them and they buy into us in a different way. Let me give you 3 simple strategies for that. 3 simple ideas. There's lots of ways you can do this, but these are 3 simple ideas. Number 1, be present in conversations. Just be present, be engaged, be focused, be paying attention, because we're all too often we're guilty of things like talking like this, right? We're looking at our cell phone, texting, checking email, doing something else. We're not paying attention. Or we're looking around the room, and a networking opportunity later today, you're looking around the room to see what everybody else is doing, and that comes across to people, doesn't it? Have you ever had that happen to you, where you're talking to somebody and they're really not paying attention? I start saying weird things like, and then I punched him in the face, and they're like, yeah, good, yeah, all right, sounds good. You know, they're just not paying attention, and it comes across. So be present. Number 2, learn how to ask better questions. Learn how to open people up with those questions. Learn how to get to the heart of the matter. Learn how to get people to really share with you. Ask them about their passion. Ask them about their story. Let them open up and share so you can come to know who they are. And then number 3 is once you ask those questions, you need to learn how to listen. The truth is we're really good at listening just enough to prepare our response or rebuttal, right? We're thinking in our mind, how am I going to respond to this? Oh, I can share. Oh, yeah, that's how I'm going to. Instead of listening to understand. When you listen to understand, the person who you're talking to feels validated. They feel like you care. They feel like you understand them. And when that happens, you make that connection, and that's where influence stems from. So focus on being interested, not interesting. I'm going to skip through this quick video clip here. All right, the 4th application is to practice the platinum rule. Now, the platinum rule is something you may not have heard of before. You've heard of the golden rule before. We've all heard of that, right? The golden rule is to treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And the golden rule is part of every major world religion. The foundation of every religion in the world has this in it. And in terms of morals and ethics, it's fantastic. But when it comes to leadership and influence, it doesn't work. You see, the golden rule, to treat other people the way that you want to be treated, the truth is we're all different. We all have different needs, wants, and desires. So we need to raise the bar a little bit, if you will, and we need to practice the platinum rule. The platinum rule is to treat other people the way that they want to be treated. Now that seems like such a small thing, but it makes all the difference in the world. Because what we're talking about is that leadership is not collective, it's individual. You see, you don't lead a group of people, you lead a group of individuals. And if you care enough as a leader to understand those people as individuals and therefore treat them as individuals, they will follow you because of who you are and how you treat them. Let me give you a really great example of this so it comes to life for you a little bit. How many of you are married or in a relationship? Okay, most of you in here. There's a great book out there, I highly recommend it. It's called The 5 Love Languages. The author, Gary Chapman, lays out this idea that everyone receives love a little bit differently. He calls it your love language. He says there's 5 ways. Maybe it's words of affirmation. Maybe you love hearing praise. You know, if your spouse praises you even publicly, says, oh, they're so good at that, maybe that really means a lot to you. Maybe it's quality time. You know, taking the time to just sit down and talk and You know, eliminate distractions, turn off the TV. Maybe it's that quality time that really speaks to you. Maybe it's gifts. Some people love gifts. They love the anticipation, the opportunity to open those gifts. They love everything about it. Maybe it's acts of service. You know, if your husband does the dishes and cleans the house for you, maybe that just is like over the top. You absolutely love it. Or physical touch. Maybe it's physical touch. You love the affection of somebody else. Now, here's why the golden rule doesn't work, because if I were to treat my wife the way that I want to be treated, I would show her love the same way that I want to be shown love. And the truth is, my wife doesn't care for physical touch as much as I want her to. That's just the truth, right? You guys understand that, unfortunately. Okay, so here's the truth. For me to connect to my wife, or for you to connect to your spouse or whoever it is, we need to treat them the way that they want to be treated. We need to figure out what they want and share that with them. Now, that's a personal example, but doesn't that pertain to business too? With your vendors, with your employees, with your customers, whoever it may be. What if you knew them well enough to know their spouse's name, their kids' names, their anniversaries, their hobbies, their favorite teams, their favorite place to eat, all the things that are going on in their life? What if you knew them well enough to be able to treat them individually, to know what they like, to know what they respond to know how to push them in the right ways? What if you as a leader cared more about the individual than you did the collective whole, and you made it about them? The truth is that people do business with and refer business to people they know, like, and trust. And the number one way for people to like you and to trust you is for you to practice the platinum rule and treat them as the individual that you care about. Now, the fifth application of influence, the last one that we're going to talk about, is to seek to serve, to provide service. How many of you have ever heard of or heard the motivational speaker Les Brown before? Anybody heard Les Brown? A couple of you. Les Brown was one of the greatest speakers in the world. He was named as one of the top 5 speakers in the world by Toastmasters International. I'm going to show you a quick video clip here. This is my favorite story that Les Brown shares. He's been speaking for 50 plus years. The story's entertaining, but afterwards I want to share with you what Les Brown taught me about being a speaker.
I told Mr. Washington I wanted to become a disc jockey. Someone asked me to tell this story. And he said, Les Brown, he said, if you want to do anything worthwhile in life, you've got to be hungry. And so I started working to develop myself. He said, I want you to practice every day being a disc jockey. I said, but I don't have any job now. He said, it doesn't matter. He said that it's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. So every day I was working to develop myself. And that's what you must do. And as I was working to develop myself, I applied for a job as a disc jockey, WMB, on Miami Beach. I went to a guy named Milton Butterball. I said, how you doing, Mr. Butterball? I'd like to get a job as a disc jockey. He looked at me, he said, do you have any broadcast background? I said, no, sir, I don't. Do you have any journalism background? I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, we don't have any jobs available. I said, yes, sir. I went back to Mr. Washington and I told him. He said, don't take it personally. He said, most people are so negative, they will have to say no 7 times before they say yes. He said, go back again. So I went back again. I said, how you doing, Mr. Butterball? My name is Les Brown. He said, I know what your name is. What do you want? I said, I'd like to know whether or not you have any jobs as a disc jockey, sir. He said, didn't I just tell you yesterday we didn't have any jobs? I said, yes, sir, but I know whether or not somebody got laid off or somebody was fired, sir. He said, no one was laid off or fired. Now get on out of here. I came back the next day. Hello, Mr. Butterball, how are you? He said, fine, what do you want now? I said, I'd like to know whether or not you got any jobs, sir. Didn't I tell you the last 2 days we didn't have any jobs? I said, yes, sir, but I don't know whether or not somebody got sick or somebody died, sir. He said, no one got sick or died. Now don't come back here and throw me out again. I came back the next day like I was seeing him for the first time. I said, hello, Mr. Butterball, how are you? He looked at me with rage. He said, go get me some coffee. I said, yes, sir. And I went to get him some coffee. After a while, I would give their lunch and dinner, and I would go in the control rooms and take the disc jockeys their food, and I would not leave until they would ask me to leave. Then they started trusting me to pick up entertainers that came to town. Entertainers like the Four Tops and the Temptations and Donna Ross and the Supremes. I would drive them all over Miami Beach in the disc jockeys' big long Cadillacs. I didn't have any driver's license, but I was driving like I had some. And one day, one Saturday afternoon, while I was at the radio station, a guy named Rock was drinking while he was on the air. I was the only one there, looking at him through the control room windows, walking back and forth, young, ready, and hungry. I was saying, drink, Rock, drink. Drink, Rock. I'd have gone to get him some more if he'd asked me to. Pretty soon the phone rang, and it was the general manager. And I answered the phone. I said, hello? He said, Les, this is Mr. Klein. I said, I know. He said, Rock can't finish his program. I said, I know. He said, would you call one of the other DJs in? I said, yes, sir. I hung the phone up. I said, now he must think I'm crazy. I called my mom and my girlfriend, Cassandra. I said, y'all turn up the radio and come out on the front porch. I'm about to come on the air. I waited for about 20 minutes, and I called him back. I said, Mr. Klein, I can't find nobody. He said, young boy, do you know how to work the controls? I said, yes, sir. He said, go in there and don't say nothing here. I said, yes, sir. I couldn't wait to get behind those controls. I put on an old Stevie Wonder record called Fingertips. I sat down behind that turntable. I said, look out, this is me, LB, Triple P. Les Brown, your platter playing Papa. There were none before me, and there will be none after me. Therefore, that makes me the one and only. Young and single and love to mingle, certified, bona fide, indubitably qualified to bring you satisfaction, a whole lot of action. Look out, baby, I'm your love man. I was hungry. I was hungry. You got to be hungry.
Les Brown has been an amazing mentor for me. When I decided to pursue professional speaking, I had a chance to take him to lunch. We've become good friends, and I got to just sit down and pick his brain. He's been speaking for 50 years, and he shared all sorts of great thoughts with me. At the very end of it, right before we left, I said, Les, what's the one piece of advice I need to know? If I really want to be a professional speaker, what's the one thing that you want to share with me? And he said, never let your own agenda get in the way of what your audience needs to hear. And I want you to keep that in mind. How many of you have read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People before? Okay, virtually every hand in here. Amazing book. This was named as the #1 business book of this century. The first time I had a chance to meet Dr. Stephen Covey, the author, was at his home at a function that he was hosting. He lives not too far away from me in Utah. And a mutual friend introduced me to Dr. Covey by saying, Stephen, this is Ty Bennett. He's writing a book. And Stephen said, Ty, it's good to meet you. He said, what's the title of your book? I said, it's called The Power of Influence. He said, I like that. Can I give you some advice? Now, his book has sold 26 million copies, and I'm not really good with math, but that seemed like a lot to me. So I said, absolutely, I'd love your advice. And he said, Ty, make sure you write the book for the reader, not the writer. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, you know, it's interesting. A book that's written for the writer to build themselves up, that book just really doesn't ever go anywhere. But a book that's written for the reader to teach and to inspire, to motivate people, that book will make an impact. He said, at my age, he's now 82 years old, he said, it's interesting because you go through life thinking life is about achievement, but you realize that life is really about contribution. It's about what can I give, not what can I get. How can I impact, not what do I get in return? And you know what's interesting is that what Les Brown taught me about being a speaker, never let your own agenda get in the way of what your audience needs to hear, is the exact same advice that Stephen Covey gave me about being an author. Write the book for the reader, not the writer. What they were saying is if you really want to succeed in life, then serve people. They're saying get outside of yourself. Give a little bit. There's so many people in need. Serve other people. Make an impact. Add value, because when you do that, it helps other people, yes, but it also serves you. makes you happier. It makes you healthier. It actually makes you more of a leader. People will view you more as a leader because you're the kind of person that they want to be like, the kind of person they want to be around, the kind of person they want to follow. How many of you in the last year, let's say, have done something to serve someone else? Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend, through your church, something where you've given of yourself, time, energy, something where you've served someone in some capacity. Raise your hand if you've done that. Now look at that. Virtually every person in here, and if you look at those hands at your table in particular, if you really want to get to know the person who's sitting by you, if you really want to understand them, their motives, who they are, ask them about that experience. Ask them what they got out of it. Ask them why they did it. Because as leaders, when we serve others, we obviously impact them, but we impact ourselves as well. We're benefited as a result of it. Now, as we wrap this up, I want to share one last story with you. This story is about a man named Michael Downing. Michael Downing was asked to go over to Germany at the end of World War II and to speak to a group of wounded soldiers. And he walked into this room, and he saw hundreds of young men who were laying there, some of them amputees, some of them had been shot. They had lost all hope in their eyes, and he empathized with them. And he started his speech when it was his turn to get up. He started his speech, he stood up and he said, "I want you to know that anything is possible. I hope that you dream big dreams because you have a bright future ahead of you and the potential to achieve anything that you desire." And the soldiers weren't in very good spirits, and they started to boo him. And the booing got so severe that Michael finally stopped and he sat down. And he waited till the booing stopped. And then unexpectedly, he did something really interesting. He reached down and he took his prosthetic right leg and he removed it and he put it on the floor. And then he removed his prosthetic left leg and he put it on the floor. And then he removed his prosthetic right arm and he took off his prosthetic left hand. You see, what the soldiers didn't know about Michael Downing was that when he was 14 years old, he was riding on the back of a wagon in a snowstorm. And he fell off of the wagon, and his parents didn't realize he was missing for quite a while. By the time they came back, he had severe frostbite to the point they had to amputate both of his legs, his right arm at the shoulder and his left hand at the wrist. He empathized with these young men because he knew exactly what they were going through. I mean, think about it. A 14-year-old that just lost all 4 of his limbs. Amazingly, Michael went on to live a great life. With prosthetic limbs, he graduated from college, he was married, he had 5 kids, and he climbed the corporate ladder and became the president of a successful bank in Michigan. Sitting there now, a stump of a man in front of these soldiers, he had their attention. And he started his speech over by saying the exact same thing. He said, "I want you to know that anything is possible. I hope that you dream big dreams because you have a bright future ahead of you and the potential to achieve anything that you desire." Now, I have to imagine that that was the greatest speech that's ever been given. And his message is what I want to leave you with. Anything is possible. I hope that you all have bright dreams because you have amazing potential. Amazing potential to do incredible things. I hope this conference is a kickstart for that. That over the next 2 days you'll be able to find, network, meet with, and increase your leadership so that you can go and make an impact in the world. Thank you very much.